Hello everyone, on behalf of Aberdeen Performing Arts and the festival partners, a very warm welcome to Granite Noir. I'm Teresa Talbot and I'm a crime writer and a podcaster. I'm absolutely delighted you've joined us today for this event as part of digital staging of Aberdeen's International Crime Writing Festival. We can't be together in person. Online events such as this, they've proved invaluable over this past year, and they've opened up festivals to a whole new audience. Now, today I have the pleasure of introducing some bold new voices on the crime writing scene, and let me tell you, as debut authors go, this is some lineup. So let's get down to introductions. Saima will be a familiar face and name to many of you. An award-winning journalist who grew up in Bradford. Her article for It's Not About the Burqa received over 250,000 hits on the Guardian website in just 2 days. And she's joining us now from her home in London to talk about her debut novel, The Can. Femi Kayode is a TV writer. He recently graduated with distinction from the University of East Anglia's Creative Writing programme. He's in the middle of a PhD at Bath Spa University. He's a clinical psychologist. We'll come to all that later. Lightseekers is his debut novel, and it won the UEA Little Brown Award before the ink was even dry, and he's joining us now from his home in Namibia. Susie Yang, after receiving her doctorate in pharmacy from Rutgers, joined a tech startup company in San Francisco. Susie has been a creative writer for many years now. She's lived across the United States, Europe, Asia. She now resides in the UK, but she joins us now from her home in Chicago. And White Ivy is her deep, dark, fabulous first novel. So everyone, welcome.
Good to be here. Thanks for having us. Hi, everyone.
It's so lovely to see you all. It's great. Now, before we go into your books, and have a proper chat, I need to ask you, launching a debut in lockdown, how's that been? Saima, I'll come to you first.
It's been really interesting. It's been mixed because obviously I'd love to go on all these tours and meet everybody in person. So we've missed out on that. But the thing that's been good is that because we're all virtual, we can tap into audiences that might not have been able to make it to literature festivals. So that's been really cool. And also it's been quite exciting. It's kind of an exciting thing to do in the pandemic. You know, it kind of cuts the monotony of the making of the.
Femi, how's your experience?
It's very surreal, and I do agree with Saima. It's exactly that this whole idea that I must say I was very, very nervous about maybe a tour and speaking to people and all of those things. But the pandemic and the digital nature of the launch has actually relaxed me a lot more. And I'm sort of just enjoying the experience of talking to people all over the world that really I wouldn't have had access to if it wasn't for the pandemic. So it's surreal, it's fun, it's new, and I almost feel like a pioneer in a sense.
Susie, has that been your experience, that it's been it's opened up your books to a whole new audience that maybe otherwise you wouldn't have been able to meet virtually?
Yeah, I agree with Femi. Like, I'm such an introvert, so it's been really nice to kind of do these kind of events from, my couch, and then afterward you can relax. And I also feel kind of a special affinity with other debut authors who've launched their books in 2020. Like, I don't think that any other writers would have this particular experience, and it's already so nerve-wracking to debut your novel, but to kind of debut it in this time, it sort of feels like everything is outside of your control, and whatever happens. And in a way, it's like been freeing because of that.
So let's come on to your books now. Let's hear a wee bit about the book. Saima, The Can, it's described as a once-in-a-generation crime thriller. I mean, no pressure.
Pressure.
Give us a pitch. Give us a brief description of The Can.
So The Can, I suppose the kind of elevator pitch for it is that imagine if Michael Corleone was a woman, and imagine if Michael Corleone was a British Asian woman who lived in. So that's kind of what the Khan is about. Have I frozen out there? I'm sorry, I thought I lost you for a second.
Froze slightly, so we're going to just get a little recap. You can tell us twice, so we know that it's kind of like The Godfather set in Bradford. Is that?
So it's kind of, yeah. So it's kind of, if Michael Corleone was a woman, and if Michael Corleone was a British Asian woman in the north of England, the kind of things that he would have had to deal with and handle. So it's the story of Jia Khan, who is the reluctant daughter of a criminal kingpin in a city, which I grew up in Bradford, but Bradford is never actually mentioned in the novel. It's
goodness, I hope I haven't.
No, that's fine. It's really interesting because the parallels that people draw, I found it. In fact, it was a real conscious decision to remove that reference, because we bring our own ideas and biases, don't we, to a story that we read. Like Femi's book set in Nigeria, and I imagine people would think, oh, they know Nigeria, but we don't, because we've not been there.
Femi, Saima makes a good point there. We have all these assumptions, so go on, tell us about Lightseekers, because as I mentioned, it won an award. Go on, show off your baby, Femi, it's okay. It won an award before the ink was even dry, and it introduces us to an investigative psychologist, Philip Taiwo. So tell us who Philip is, and again, it's set in Nigeria. So tell us about Lightseekers.
Well, Lightseekers is a very it came to me first of all as an academic exercise because I wanted to pass my exams. so it just sort of like came up like that. I didn't plan. Of course, I would love to be published. That's why I went to UEA, which is a brilliant school. But it really is a story that was inspired by a real life event that happened in Nigeria. And it always bothered me. It just kept on bothering me. I don't live in Nigeria anymore. And it really did not endear me to going back home, so to speak. So I needed to create a character that was sort of like me, that would ask the same kind of questions like me. So in this, the elevated pitch really is that an investigative psychologist who just returned from the US has been asked by a murder victim, the parent of a victim, to investigate what you call the necklace killing of 3 graduates in a university. And it just leads to one thing or the other. And my whole point was just to look at the systemic issues in a country like Nigeria that would lead to that kind of crime happening. What sustains that attitude and that behavioral pattern within a culture, and why is it okay? Why is there, why is it okay for this to happen? And nobody is, who are we? Where do we come from? So for me, that was, Philip Taiwo was almost me trying to navigate myself through my home country and rediscover my love for my country and my people.
Well, we'll come back to the issues covered in Lightseekers. Because there's a real gritty brutality to this book, and as you say, the necklace killings, they were, horrified people around the world. I don't think there's anyone that isn't aware of things that can happen, but it also, so many horrible things happen. I mean, we're all crime writers. Horrible things happen within, our psyche. We understand them. Now, Susie, White Ivy, it's described as bold, daring and sexy. The immigrant story we've been dying to hear. Is it the immigrant story you were dying to write?
I think so. What inspired me was I really wanted to create a very anti-hero character who would kind of go to great lengths to get what she wanted. So White Ivy tells the story of Ivy Lin, and we follow her from when she's a child to an adult. And she falls in love with this very patrician New England boy who is the son of a Massachusetts state senator. And as an adult, they reconnect. And essentially the book is Ivy like lying and scheming and trying to manipulate her way into getting this life of privilege that she's felt has been denied her from her very humble roots. As for the crime part, I think it's just, for me, I just really enjoy good twists. And I really enjoy the feeling of a character who's really determined. Because I think at the time I was watching shows like, Breaking Bad or House of Cards, and just feeling like there were these really strong male protagonists and they do horrible things, but at the same time, they have so much conviction that what they're doing is worth it. So I sort of wanted to kind of create an anti-hero along those veins who's very Machiavellian and would kind of bring about her own destruction.
Well, that's interesting that you do mention Breaking Bad and the fact that the anti-heroes, the protagonists, that they're, we do, we're supporting them. We can see why they're doing what they're doing. The world's viewers and listeners and readers, they seem a bit less forgiving of a female protagonist, or they had in the past. So was this something that you were aware of? Were you ever kind of second guessing, how are people going to react to this?
It was interesting because I sometimes get questions, did you intend to write an unlikable character? But I guess for me, I never, even when I read books, I don't categorize characters, as likable or unlikable. To me, I'm really drawn to morally gray characters, and I really love to see why people feel so compelled to do really extreme acts of violence or whatever that may be. And so I didn't do it on purpose, but I've had mixed reactions. I think people can either sympathize. I hope they can sympathize even if they don't agree with the character's decisions.
Saima, is that something that you're aware of? Characters don't have to be likable, they have to be interesting. I mean, we've had Pollyanna, we've had all the nice characters. It's, and I'm thinking back to when I read Thomas Harris, Hannibal Lecter. Had Hannibal Lecter been a woman, that book would never have been the success at the time. But are we now ready for really interesting female characters?
I think we are. I think I read this piece of advice that stayed with me, and it said, I'm not here to be liked, I'm here to do the job. It was, and I kind of took that as a piece of life advice, because all you can do is do your best, right? But people view us through their own lens. And especially for women, if you're a strong woman or an intelligent woman, or you're not behaving in a certain way, somebody else can put their own opinion onto you. And so I wanted to write a character who was just trying to get her way through life, was just trying to survive and get the job done. She found herself in a situation as the eldest in her family who just needed to take care of a situation and had been through enough of life to know that, as Susie said, this morally grey area. When you start out in life and you're 21 and you think there's black and there's white and that's it, and there's right and there's wrong. And then as you get older, maybe not with crime, but with some things, the lines get blurry. So I wanted to write about that. And I think the timing of it is really interesting for both my book and Susie's, because even things like Netflix has had genres for strong women. There's all these great female characters that are coming out, and hopefully we're breaking out of those boxes of women can either be the Virgin Mary or the whore. There is so much crossover, for how these things and how life happens. So I think we're ready. I think we're kind of a more mature audience now. And I think there's a hunger for it. The people are interested. We don't want to read about Pollyanna anymore. We want to read about people like us.
This a book, though, Saima, that you could have written 5 years ago, maybe, or even 2 years ago, should I say, or had it published 5 years ago?
Yes, I agree with you. I think it wouldn't have been published 2 years ago. So I wrote the Khan when I was pregnant, which was about 6-7 years ago, and it sort of sat there for a while. And the effects of timing is everything, really. You sort of, I think I grew as a writer and my experiences expanded, and then society changed around me. And I think Black Lives Matter has massively influenced how the Khan has been received. Because I think publishers now want to read about women of colour and men of colour across the genres, across crime, romance, high literary fiction, chick lit. Whereas before, I think there was a section, wasn't there? Black writers, and we'd go there, and that's where we'd find ourselves amongst those pages.
Femi, I apologies if I ever call you Philip throughout this interview, because I've been reading Lightseekers. It's you that I can see. So Philip has kind of morphed into Femi for me. And likewise, you deal with some very, very difficult and uncomfortable truths in Lightseekers, with the politics, the race, almost like the kangaroo justice system of Nigeria. How has that been received by your peers?
I think it's exactly what Saima is talking about, and that is that it seems to me somehow that everything just came together, right, at the same time. And I almost feel like, when they talk about life imitating art and art imitating life kind of thing, I mean, this book was written about 4 years ago. And I remember while I was writing it, I was like, this will never happen. Nobody would ever understand what you're talking about, and today, I mean, I think about last month, the book got picked up for a film option, and the producer was telling me, he was like, when I was reading it, and he's all the way in the US, and he said, while I was reading it, they were storming the Capitol, and this is, I'm reading about Nigeria, and I feel as if this could happen here, and for me, I thought that was just the most beautiful testimony to the fact that as writers, our first job is to tell a human story. It's not to tell a likable story, it's not to tell even an interesting story, but to really just get to the core of the human experience, and when you do it well, it really doesn't matter whether it's a Nigerian story or it's a Russian story or whatever. It really is just a story well told. And that's what the feedback that I'm getting is that it seems that it's a story well told, so I'm very excited about that, because across cultures everywhere, the feedback I'm getting is, I see this, I understand it. Yes, the crime in itself that we're solving is sort of alien to some cultures, but the reactions and the behavior of the characters in terms of how they are solving the issue and how they are reacting to the issue is very, very universal, so to speak. And I just wanted to say something about the female characters that are very interesting and how Netflix, for instance, is actually adding to that. One of the biggest regrets that I have about Lightseekers is not making Philip Taiwo female. Because I really, it's like the time of the female is now. I watched a very fascinating movie they called I Care a Lot. Is just phenomenal in terms of how the strong female character is coming across, and you just have to, you as the reader or the viewer, you have to sort of check your biases and your prejudices, and you have to ask yourself, why do you think a woman can't think like that? Why do you think a woman can't act like that? And it actually forces you as the male reader or the male viewer to actually check yourself, because some of us come to the table like, oh no, we are feminists, like everybody else. But in actual fact, I saw myself watching it yesterday, and I was like, no, don't do that. No, girls don't do that. Okay, well, you can do that. Go ahead. I like you, kind of thing. So that's something I just wanted to add to the Saima and Susie's comments about the female hero.
For it's almost that. The kind of dual values that we put on, male and female characters. I mean, Susie, the publishing world is now, banging our drum saying, oh, we want more diversity. We need to hear from more diverse writers. I'm sure everyone's holding their hand up saying, I've been here all along, And that's a strange thing. So when you were writing your book, Susie, commercially, were you thinking, I want to write a book that's going to sell, or were you telling a story?
I have to say my experience a little bit weird because I was working in such a different industry before this. I went to pharmacy school, like you said, but I hated it so much. So then I went to work in tech for a while, but I've been writing my whole life in secret, essentially. I was one of those kids that didn't show anybody. And I thought, I could never make a career of being a writer. So when I was working on White Ivy, it was really just, I gave myself 1 year to finish the draft, because up to that point, I couldn't finish a novel. I was just always writing like, stories and chapter ones. So I had no concept of what came after. It was just in secret while I was working, only my husband knew about it, but I didn't let him read it. And so I just wanted to prove to myself that I could finish it, so that I could still kind of like hold on to the idea that this is something that I love doing. And then, so my process to kind of, the publication process has been very shocking and a massive learning experience for me. Like even finding my agent, I met her at a writers conference in Portland called Tin House. And so even that process, she had to sort of just like walk me through it. Like I didn't know, how the contracts work and how editing with my editor would work. So I would say that my experience now working on my second book is very different from how I wrote the first one, because that one I can say I was completely ignorant of what it meant to publish. Yeah.
Oh, believe you me, 4 books in, I still don't have it. I just know it. So we've been chatting about the dual cultures that you've all, the 3 of you have straddled with these books. Susie, I'm not saying you are Ivy, not in a million years. When I was reading the blurb and your bio, you didn't meet or formally meet your parents properly until you were 5, and that very much is mirrored in Ivy's experience. So tell us a bit about that, first of all, from your own culture, that you're straddling 2 cultures, because your parents moved out of, they moved to America when you were a baby. Tell us that.
Yeah, so I was born in China, and my parents came to the US. My dad went to school, and I was, I think, probably around 2. So I was essentially raised by my grandparents for the next 3-4 years before I came to the US and began to live with my parents again. And I wrote an essay, I think that's what you're referencing. I wrote an essay for Over Magazine about the culture of Asian Americans being raised by their grandparents at a certain point. And it's quite common in the Chinese and Chinese American culture. And for how it came to be in the book, I actually am a really lazy writer. Like I don't like research. So for me, when it kind of came time to write about Ivy's backstory, I sort of just drew on cultural details that I knew and, that I heard from friends and just was very familiar to me. And the most surprising part is what other people find surprising. So, so that detail was almost cut out because I just didn't think it was that important, where Ivy was born or where she was raised. But my agent thought that it was a really pivotal, background story for Ivy to explain her alienation with her mother. And at that point I thought, does that explain her alienation with her mother? So it's really just what other people find unusual or that they thought, was interesting, which I didn't necessarily think was unusual or interesting. So yeah, in terms of just what I drew from my life, it's really just the cultural, details, because like I said, it really was I'm just like intuitively kind of filled it in, and I knew where the story was going. So whatever served the story, those were the facts that I sort of pulled to create the character. But yeah, I would say that personality wise, we're quite different.
There's a gorgeous line in the book, and I'm paraphrasing now. Ivy's personality or character was formed like the trickle of water around the hard rocks. Like China. And that just depicted how slowly we are formed by what's happening. Femi, did you what about your experiences? Did you draw on your own experiences? Because Philip is a clinical psychologist.
No, Philip is an investigative psychologist.
Oh, investigative. Apologies.
No, it's fine.
Psychology.
I promise you that even I cannot differentiate some fields of psychology. I know that I didn't want to be a practicing clinical psychologist. I didn't want to be a therapist. I really went back to do my postgraduate in clinical psychology because I think I wanted to understand me more than I wanted to understand other people, in a sense. And 1 year into practicing, I just knew this was not for me, which is very different from Philip Taiwo. Philip Taiwo, in the sense, is an investigative psychologist, and essentially he's not a forensic psychologist. He is someone that you want, that either side of a crime investigation would want on their side, because what he does is basically to look at the motives of the crime. He looks at the investigative, the procedure, and tries to be sure that it's fair to both parties. So that's what he really is. So he looks at, for instance, why won't the police investigate something further? What's stopping them? Why is the accused confessing, to a crime? So those are the things that he really looks at. So he's more of a procedural psychologist, so to speak. Is he like me? Yes, there's a lot of similarities. I've always wanted to have twins. He has twins. So we're around about the same age. But I think that's where the similarities really end, because really for me, he took on a life of his own. And he started, I think the similarities is more that he's asking the questions that, like I said, that I would ask. But in terms of how he goes about it, we are really quite different where that is concerned. Also, because I didn't want to get to create a superhero Sherlock Holmes kind of character. I wanted an everyman kind of character that just uses his intellect and his training basically to solve a crime. And so it was very important. I think the third thing about it is that he doesn't actually investigate crimes to find out what happened or who did it. He asks why. And that for me was the twist to the story. I've read a lot of, and I think I speak to all of us here, people of color, as new writers, that one of the things that we've always struggled with is having our writings placed within the context of, African writing, literary writing and all that. And I didn't want that. I really, I think I broke down in tears on the launch of the book in front of my publishers, because the book was placed right next to James Patterson, and it was placed right next to Stuart McBride, and it's not in the African fiction section. And I was like, yes, finally. So that was really very exciting for me, and I have a sneaky suspicion that Saima feels it too. It's not in that space where
it's just not in world music, the world,
kind of thing, and that is so exciting, and it actually makes me take so much pride in my publishers, my editors, and my agents, for actually seeing this. I remember when I selected my agent and he took me on, he said to me, he said, I see this book next to Stephen King. I see it next to John Grisham. And I was like, you're the one for me. You're the one kind of thing. And that is not to say that one does not appreciate, what you can say, the people that went before us, that cleared the path, the Naipals of this world, the Chimamandas of this world, the Chinua Achebes of this world. We appreciate them, but Africa and Africans, we've moved on. We have serial killers, we have, we have skyscrapers, we can tell really, really exciting stories that can stand shoulder to shoulder with what you can call more contemporary crime fiction. And so for me, that is really what I wanted Philip to do, is to stand up and say, this is a new type of African hero or a Nigerian hero.
Absolutely, because we know who done the crime. It's not a who done it, it's a why done it. And I mentioned the brutality of the necklace killings and how horrific they are, but I don't really think there's any nation that can stand or take the moral high ground, with viewing, crimes that may be associated elsewhere, or when we see something, that would never happen in my backyard, because, it's universal. It may be different types, but it's absolutely universal. Now, Saima, you touched on the pigeonholing, and I grew up in Scotland, so Glasgow, as you can probably tell by my accent, Femi, and I hope you're managing to cope with my Glaswegian accent. But that pigeonholing, I mean, for me, I grew up in an area of Glasgow, the Pollock Shields, with a very strong Asian community, and I just wondered, every single Asian we saw on television or read in books, they were either a shopkeeper or a really quiet, good doctor. You know, they just pigeonholed, and it was just lazy. And in the same way that every drunk person is Glaswegian, and you know, when you know any sort of London-based things, are we kind of breaking out of the pigeonhole? Do you think?
I think we are. I think we are finally. I mean, it's sort of like when I was growing up, there weren't many South Asian women in literature, except for those wonderful books that Femi's mentioned, those kind of pioneers who came and did all that groundwork. But there wasn't just an ordinary Asian brown girl growing up in England. And then there were women who were kind of Muslim women in hijabs who needed rescuing. You know, they were oppressed and they were honor killed. And it was like, you know, this is not our life. This is not who we are. And I think it is changing, because I met these wonderful women who write South Asian protagonists, and you know, across the board we're seeing these writers come through, whether it's Kalola Hill that's just come out, or Sophia Khan is Not Obliged, or Homa Qureshi's How We Met. So we are now seeing these characters, and I think it's brilliant because we learn about each other, don't we, through that. That's how we bring change, I think. So my past, as I said, is I worked in news. I thought I was going to change the world by news and news stories. And then I realized that nobody's listening to news. Nobody's not changing us the way we want it to. But these stories, they sort of whisper to us, and they, without us even realizing, they change how we see the world. You know, as Femi's mentioned, you know, Nigeria has serial killers, and I know this from reading My Sister, the Serial Killer.
Oh wow, yeah.
You know, these. I mean, it's fiction, but I know this now because I read that book. And you know, Susie's mentioned about being from China and being raised by grandparents. I didn't know that, but now, without having to go to some factual, heavy book, I can learn that beautiful piece of information. So I think I think it's brilliant that it's changed.
No, it is lovely being able to read books, and I know it's crime fiction. It's not there to educate. It's there, you know, it's entertainment. We're novel writers, but how much? And I'm putting this to the three of you. How much responsibility do you feel to make sure that you educate or you pass on certain amounts of information? What kind of responsibility is on the shoulders of writers?
I'm sorry, I don't know who you're asking now, but I just
that's good, Femi. You can answer it. Don't say anyone.
I really like to say that because I personally love a lot of writers' workshops, because I love writers' workshops, and I've been in so many writers' workshops online and wherever. And when I send out drafts of my work, and the notes that come from different parts of the world, literally, shows you the power of stories to change minds. You know, I remember just yesterday, I sent something out, and somebody from the US sends back and says, I have a problem with the word guys, sexist word, you know, and I'm like, it's not a sexist word where I come from. You know, my kids come back down from their room and they go, hi guys, you know, it's not, you know. So one of the things that we find out over and over again is that as crime fiction writers, we actually have the unique ability to present the world, our world, through social class, through social systems across, because there is no one that is connected to the rich and the poor like the policeman. There is no one that travels the social structure of a society like someone that's trying to solve a crime, you know. So I think crime fiction has this powerful role to play in presenting the world or our world and educate. I wouldn't like to use the word educate, but really to give a lens, to see another world in an interesting, exciting, and quite real manner. So for me, I'm very excited about that because it's a very important responsibility that I take very seriously. You know, Africa is not a country, for instance. It's something that I take very seriously. This crime took place in Nigeria, which just happens to be in Africa, but it's not a story about Africa, you know, and that's something that's very important to share. And so it's a heavy responsibility. And one of the things that I found out, I don't know what Susie sees and what Saima has experienced where that is concerned, is that you need to come into it with a lot of humility and understand that they sincerely don't know. So when they ask these questions and when they make these assumptions about your story, it's because they sincerely don't know. So you need to take a step backwards and sort of like, how can I present this without teaching? How can I present this without educating? How can I entertain you and tell you a story that almost subliminally shifts your perspective? And that is the responsibility.
It's very true. You know, a book, a movie, a play will stay with the reader, the viewer, long after a news report or, you know, a news article. Susie, White Ivy it's more than a crime. It's a real examination of race and prejudice and relationships. There's a lot going on there.
Yeah, and I just really wanted to add on to actually what Femi said. It's all related, which is that I feel like for me, especially because I already said that I really disliked research, I sometimes have questions, you know, is this, you know, are the Lins, which is the family that I write about, you know, are the representative of, you know, Chinese families? And that's so interesting because I would never read a book, you know, and said in America and think this is representative of all American families. You know, I think it's the logic is very internal to that book. And it's very internal to that family and it's very internal to the story. And as a reader, I intuitively understand that. Like, I don't ever pick up a book and think it's trying to teach me anything or it's trying to, you know, show me some universal thing. It's always very odd to the family. But as a writer, I think sometimes because of the pressure you feel to be accurate, you know, or you feel like you don't want to have a misstep, then I start to think, oh, you know, is this accurate? But I think I'm trying to, at least, is to portray something convincing. And the convincing thing isn't even necessarily cultural, but emotional, for me at least. You know, it has to feel true in a way for myself. And so, yeah, so I think with White Ivy, like that, the internal logic of that, you know, Ivy's desire to kind of marry into this very white, wealthy, waspy family, that's internal to Ivy's logic. That's not my logic, you know, or other Asian women in Americas, but it's specifically to her, you know, and her upbringing. And so I think when I came up with her family, it was really to garner sympathy for Ivy because I wanted readers to understand why she would kind of do all those horrible things later on in life. But I don't think any, you know, anyone I know or any of my friends or, you know, growing up would agree with that. But at the same time, I think the universal feeling that Ivy has of being an outsider is what I wanted to bring to the story that I think people can relate to. So yeah, so I think we can have these discussions that are really interesting about, you know, the different cultures and the immigrant experience and things like that. But at the same time, whether it's crime or a different genre, to me, reading has to be the pleasure of that specific person and their head, and, you know, the universal themes of love and belonging and things like that. Yeah.
Well, Ivy's crimes they almost go in increments. We can see her just almost like dipping her toe in the water. How far?
Yeah.
This, and again, that's universal. That's nothing to do with, you know, race or to do with their upbringing. So, and we know, you know, I was almost kind of thinking, oh no, Ivy, don't stop now. And Saima, with the can, we see this kind of Jaya is very initially very moralistic, and yeah, she's got it all going on. And then we think, there are grey areas here. You know, she's disgusted that her dad is a master criminal, yet she defends men she knows are guilty. And we realise that there's a lot of bleeding through. And again, that's nothing to do with culture. That's human psyche. That's the crime novel at its best, isn't it?
Yeah, I think women have a universal experience, don't we? We have a universal experience that isn't always talked about. So we talk about intersectionality, don't we? Where we're divided up into various groups, we're black, we're brown, we're white. But actually,
you cut out very slightly. Can you just repeat that last?
Sorry, I've lost you, haven't I?
No, you can, if you can hear us, you've frozen slightly.
I was just saying, actually,
you're back.
Am I back? We are each other's women. We are each other's greatest allies. We go through the same things against different backdrops, and I think that's one of the things that's really resonated with lots of people who've read the Khan, that we can see the decisions that we make about family. Jia Khan is a mother. She has a relationship. She's someone's daughter, and all those things that we are universal experiences for most of us. So, we talk about patriarchy. We haven't yet won that battle anywhere in the world, have we? We're still fighting it in different levels. And so I think that speaks to kind of the universal experience.
With a crime novel,
my freezing.
Can you hear me okay, Saima? With a crime novel, and I'm putting this out to Susie, Femi, and Saima, with a crime novel, how very, very dark things are covered. How important is it to have maybe not a happy ending, but a resolution? How important is it to give the reader something at the end? That's something, Femi, do you feel under pressure to have a resolution at the end of your books?
Okay, first of all, it's a series in my own case. So yes, that case is solved. But I do remember that my first draft, the villain got away, and the early readers was like, no, and but I think I sort of, for lack of a better word, I sort of killed him up, not because everybody said no, but simply because of the fact that people assumed that the villain is going to be in the next book. And that was not the plan. It's the next investigation is a totally different investigation. And so I didn't want to have any lingering thoughts about the previous one in the next one. So I sort of like killed him off there. But I think it's very important that I think people read crime stories to get a resolution and not necessarily to get a happy ending, but really to get a sense of closure, that, they need that sense of closure, not everything tied into little boxes and, put in their own little corners, but to get a sense that there is some kind of justice and fairness in the world, and I think it's a very strong universal feeling across board, and I subscribe to that. I do like a well-resolved story. And I think the one thing is also that because there's no story in black and white, there's no interest. There's nothing interesting in black and white. Hero goes after, solves the case, and then, everything is fine. There's no story there. The stories are in the gray areas and the moral choices and the ethical decisions that your characters have to make through the line. And when they're close to making a decision and then you pull them back and then they go back and, do it. I think so for me, just making sure that the story ends at the right gray area, that doesn't make it seem like a Cinderella story kind of thing. I think it's the responsibility of a crime writer to you need to balance that out, satisfy the need for justice and keep it going in such a way that everybody can say, oh, there's still bad guys out there.
Well, I can't actually believe how the time is going. We're starting to get lots of questions coming in from viewers. Now, Hazel has asked a question that I was just going to ask next. All of your books, all of you've had your books, you've had TV or film options for them. Is it a dream or a nightmare? I know as an author, I'd say it's a dream, having your work made, put on the screen. Susie, Netflix has actually optioned White Ivy, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a dream. I mean, it's just been so fast, so it hasn't, I I haven't seen it. Like it's still very much early, but I think it's wonderful. Yeah, it's so, I mean, I love watching book adaptations, and if it's well done, like I loved Normal People. That was amazing. That was an amazing adaptation. I can't wait for conversations with friends. So yeah, I think it's amazing.
Saima, rather, the can is BBC have optioned it, so there's chance we'll see it on the screen. Is that a bit kind of nerve-wracking? Like, oh goodness, what are they going to do to my baby? Right, you've just cut out.
Sorry, I've got this really unstable internet connection. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I sure can.
Sorry. Is it a dream? It's actually really nice. One of the things I always decided with the Khan was once I've written the book, it's gone, and it's Raphael who is now in charge of it. It's her baby now, as far as I'm concerned, and so she will do with it what she kind of sees fit, really. I don't know if that makes sense. I think you kind of have to let your baby go a bit. And screen is such a different medium, so the way that it's interpreted by that writer is going to have to it is a dream. It's a dream, I think. But I'm not seeing it as the same thing. It's a different medium. Yeah, and I love screen, and I love screenwriters, and I love their profession. So I'm just really lucky that the team at BBC Studios are brilliant. So yeah.
Femi, you've written for TV. So how would you feel if someone else took Lightseekers? You know, how because it has been optioned. Are you wanting more control? Are you okay to let your baby go?
Actually, it's very interesting, because the first thing I told my agent when the offer came in is that make sure you tell them that I want nothing to do with writing. You know, and it's exactly like Saima said, it's two different mediums. The baby's out there, it's out in the world, let it grow, let it be. I'm moving on to other things. I'm really enjoying being a writer. I like owning my process. I love it. A film is an exceptionally collaborative, and you can get lost in that whole value chain, you know. So, and I deliberately decided that I wanted to start writing novels because I didn't want to be part of that value chain again. So I love the fact that it's been taken up, and I'm looking forward to actually sitting down in the theater, on the TV room, and just, you know, just enjoying the story from another angle. So yeah, it's a dream.
And Fiona asks, who are your favorite authors? So who do you, I was going to ask who you read as children, which authors you had growing up. So we can maybe cover that. Who did you look to? I mean, did you have any anti-heroes you can identify with, Susie, growing up? And who do you read now?
Yeah, I'm a huge rereader. So growing up, I would read my favorite books over and over again. And I loved Edith Wharton novels. I loved Fitzgerald. I loved Steinbeck. I would say I loved Murakami and Ishiguro. So I would say that it was a mix of kind of coming of age and like family stories mixed with a kind of, you know, society novel. I loved Anna Karenina. Like I just, you know, it's sort of like the kind of like the entire scope of, you know, women who are destitute or they want something else, you know, they dream of a better life. I think I've always been attracted to that type of theme. And then in terms of now, I mean, not that much different. Like I love Elena Ferrante, you know, I mentioned Sally Rooney. I loved Hanya Yanagihara. So just like women writers who kind of write worlds that I think are convincing to me and that kind of really show the nuance of like what I experience, you know, as a modern day kind of very, I don't know, I think all the cultures these days, it's so global, you know, there's very few things that we haven't seen on YouTube or we haven't kind of like been exposed to. And so all the stories, I think, that feel like it's taking place in this world in a way I can relate to. Yeah, I'm really a fan of those authors.
Saima, you're a journalist. Were you an avid reader as a child, and who do you read now?
I read everything now. As a child,
yeah, who did you read growing up? Saima, I'm going to come back to you.
When I was growing up, I could never find writers by.
Right, I'm going to come back to you because just until we've got a better, slightly better connection. Now, Femi, I read somewhere that you were addicted to Harold Robbins' steamy novels. Is that true? Did you have to?
I really was addicted to Harold Robbins, but actually my favorite writer when I was growing up was a guy called Sidney Sheldon.
Oh, yes. Wow.
He had exactly the same kind of trajectory in terms of me, in terms of being a screenwriter, and he did everything, and he wrote about strong women, and always this, like you can see his books, you know, you feel that you are actually, and he never took himself seriously, you know, he just told the stories. He wasn't trying to be a great writer, you know, and all that. And I remember that the Naked Face just blew my mind, and I knew I wanted to be a storyteller, you know, from reading those books. So Harold Robbins, A Stone for Danny Fisher, still is one of my all-time favorite books. But on the literary front, I really, really love a lot of books, you know, that, you know, I had to read as a literature student. Some I enjoyed, some I had to study. But modern, I'm a big fan of Hanya Yanagihara. A Little Life is my all-time favorite book right now. So
I love that book. I've read that book 3 times already.
Yeah, you know, so it's my
what endorsement. Wow.
Yeah, so like, if I can balance my life, and actually my villain is a reimagined character in A Little Life. So
which one?
Tortured one. You see it, it's a reimagined one. But the thing about it is that I do love all of those books, and they've been very, very good. And Nigerian writers, my sister, the serial killer, Onyekwa, is a brilliant writer, really a brilliant writer. And I'm hoping to see more from them, kind of thing. Yeah.
Saima, if I can come back to you, and I want to ask you, kind of split this into being a journalist, then going into fiction. How did you, were there sort of difficulties there? And what's your go-to book? Do you have this?
So I read a lot growing up. That was kind of my escape, was reading. I would love to read books by people of color, and I really couldn't find anything that was about me. And I used to read a lot of African-American literature. I used to love Maya Angelou. I read everything I could. I was a huge Malcolm X fan, and I read a lot of his speeches, the rhythm of the language, which really stayed with me. I loved that. God of Small Things was my favorite book for a long, long time. Suitable Boy, when it came out, was the first time I read. Wow. I saw a brown woman on the pages of a book, and there was a writer called Bapsi Sidhwa, who I used to love, who wrote books set in Pakistan. So I read that, and then I read a lot of like Stephen King and James Patterson and all those kind of things. So I'm impatient, and like Susie was saying, I'm a lazy writer and a lazy reader. I just want stuff to happen now, you know, and I hope that I write like that as well. Like, I feel like it's a real privilege when someone gives us their time to pick up that book and read it. So I like things to happen quickly. And in terms of journalism and fiction, journalism taught me pacing. You know, this happened, and this happened, this in the background of it. But the drawback to it is, because it's so concise, that I underwrite instead of overwriting. So I've kind of had to learn that, how to add more texture, where I'm thinking, I don't really want to talk about the curtains in the window. I just want to talk about what's going on. So I've had to learn that, which has been a really good process.
What about the actual nuts and bolts of writing? I mean, do y'all, I'll just do this round robin because we're kind of almost running out of time. Do you sit down, do you plot, are you very intellectual about it? Or do you just think, oh, bloody hell, I've got a deadline, I better go. Susie, I'll start with you. How do you actually write?
No outline. I think I always, my inspiration is always what I want to say. So I just think about what is a fascination, and it could be a theme or it could be a contradiction. Usually for me, it's some kind of character behavior that's like not in line with who they are, but they're behaving oddly. So then I start with that. And then very quickly I develop, you know, the world and then the arc of where I think these people are going to go. And then I start writing. And then the nuts and bolts of the writing. I'm a night owl, and I'm quite an extreme personality. So I'll write for 3 months, you know, like 12 hours a day, and then take a month off. So I tend to do 3-month chunks because I have to maintain the immersion. Otherwise I start to lose interest.
And so someone's just popped up a message. Do you ever include anyone you know in your books? Any characters?
I mean, I've only written one, and I don't think so.
Femi, what's your writing process? And as Jack has just messaged to ask, do you ever include people in your characters that you're?
No, not really. I'm sure a lot of my friends would like to think I include them, but I really don't. I use names though. I use names of my friends, my family, and things like that. But I don't. It's not interesting actually. I don't know why anybody would do that. It's really not interesting. It's too much fact. I don't like too much fact. So research. I'm a very lazy researcher. And I'm very much like Susie. I'm a night owl. I wake up at 2 a.m. in the morning and I would work until 6. And it has to go like that. And how do I work? If I'm not having fun, I stop.
Oh, I like that.
If I'm not having fun, I stop.
Do you know the ending before you start? Do you know?
I know the last sentence. I know. I don't know the middle. I have no idea what the middle is. I know the first sentence and I know the last sentence, and it never changes. It's never ever changed. But I have no clue what's going to happen in the middle. And so it's a sense of discovery for me when I'm working. When I finish a chapter, I'm like, wow, that's exciting. Then I know that I'm gonna, but when I'm like struggling through it and I go, then I know I'm not having fun. Then I can't expect the reader to have fun, So it's exactly like Saima said, they're giving you the privilege of their time, and you just got to make sure that they enjoy the exercise. I don't want them, So the cotton drapes and the ground and all that, it's not important. Yeah.
Saima, without delving into Bronte country and the drapes and the heather, and when you're writing, are you very methodical? Do you plot it out?
I envy people who are really methodical and really good planners. I'm not. And I always start out thinking, I'm going to sit down and plan this baby out. And then I just lose it halfway through. And I think, this is boring. I'm just going to write it. So I have like a rough skeleton of like a few things. And then also it's that thing about learning. One of the things I love is that you're living with that character in your head. And so you're learning about them. So that kind of organic growth, I like that. So I have a rough idea, but nothing. I wish, there's some people I know who have like Gantt charts and this is going to happen, this is going to happen. And I also don't have time for that. And I'm impatient and lazy, like I've said. So, and I also write in snatches because I have 3 children who usually need their nose wiping or something. The most time when you're just about to write the most crucial sentence and you have to leave and then sort them out. So I write in snatches. So I don't really, planning. No, not much planning going on here, unfortunately. I wish.
No, this is music to my ears. And what's next? I need to ask you all what's next, because believe it or not, we're almost out of time. We've got 2 minutes left. So Saima, with you, what's next, fiction-wise? I
am working on a sequel for the Khan, but you'll have to kind of wait to see what comes at the minute.
Femi, we know that Lightseekers is the first in a series, so how far down that road are you?
I'm well on my way. Unfortunately, I have some plot issues, so I'm going backwards again. I've not been able to go to Nigeria to do my research, so I'll most likely be doing that to add in the textures and to confirm plausibility and all that. But yeah, I'm working on a sequel.
Susie, this writing fiction now, it must be in your DNA. You must have decided this is it. So for you, what's the next stage?
Yeah, currently working through a draft of a completely different novel, but contemporary love story, and a lot of it is set within the Chinese entertainment industry, so kind of dealing with the idea of the public persona and the private self, and really similar themes to my first book, like comedy of manners and identity politics. I think those are just still the themes that I find myself being drawn to.
Well, guys, in a non-sexist way, guys, unfortunately, we've been called to time. So all that remains for me to say is a huge thank you to Saima Mir, Femi Kayode, Susie Yang, and of course a huge thank you to the organisers who pulled out all the stops to get the festival online. Now, Granite Noir bookselling partner is Waterstones, so do buy Lightseekers, White Ivy in the can. You can visit their website at waterstones.com. Now, I believe the can is also available to pre-order at the moment. There's also a special limited edition. There's blood splatters on it and everything. I'm assured that they're false, but it's out on the 1st of April. So do go to waterstones.com or follow the links on the festival site. All Granite Noir events are free to view, but please do consider making a donation. So for the moment, all I can say is thank you so much for watching. Take care, stay safe, goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.